The morning was bright but cold, the kind of cold that seeped through the windows of even the fanciest restaurants in New York City. The lunch rush had barely begun when an old man stepped through the glass doors of La Maison d'Or, a high-end restaurant known for its polished marble floors, golden lights, and air of exclusivity. He wore a faded brown coat that looked far too old for the place, his shoes were scuffed, and his hat, slightly crumpled, shaded a face lined with years and wisdom. But to everyone watching, he was just another elderly man, alone, perhaps a little out of place, and not worth paying attention to. No one knew that the man who had just entered was a billionaire from Japan, a man who had quietly built an empire through decades of humility, patience, and respect. If you believe that kindness and second chances can change the world, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Kindness Thread channel, where stories like this remind us that humanity still matters. The man slowly made his way toward an empty table near the window, his movements deliberate, careful, as though every step held a memory. He smiled politely at the hostess, but she hesitated. Dressed in designer black and trained to recognize wealthy clients, she quickly scanned his appearance and decided he probably couldn't afford to eat there. Still, with forced courtesy, she guided him to a corner table, placing a menu before him without another word. The old man sat quietly, looking around with eyes filled not with judgment but gentle curiosity. The restaurant buzzed with chatter from businessmen in suits, couples on dates, and tourists clicking photos of their plates. No one looked at him twice. He tried to catch a waiter's attention, but each one passed by, pretending not to see. Minutes turned into half an hour. His glass of water remained empty, his menu untouched because no one came to take his order. He sat patiently, hands folded, not out of helplessness but out of deep, practiced calm. It was the kind of calm that only someone who had endured a lifetime of being underestimated could carry. What no one there knew was that this man, Mr. Kenji Takahiro, was one of Japan's most respected industrialists. He had come to America not for business but for something deeply personal. Decades ago, when he was just a young engineer studying abroad, he had fallen in love with a woman from this city. They shared dreams, laughter, and endless letters even after he returned to Japan. But life took them apart, and though he built a vast empire, he never stopped thinking of her. Now, widowed and alone, he had returned to revisit the places they once walked together, to see if any piece of her memory still lingered in the streets they once called theirs. As time passed, customers began to notice him sitting quietly, and a few even whispered. Some assumed he was lost. Others thought he might be waiting for someone who would never arrive. The restaurant staff began exchanging glances, wondering if he should be asked to leave. But before anyone could act, a young waitress named Emily noticed him. She was new to the job, working double shifts to support her mother's medical bills and her younger brother's education. Tired, but with a heart that still believed in kindness, Emily watched the man bow his head slightly toward every passing waiter, only to be ignored again and again. Something inside her stirred. She remembered how her late father used to bow gently whenever he thanked someone, a habit he picked up during his years working in Japan. Without thinking, she approached the man's table, her eyes soft and welcoming. When the old man looked up, she smiled warmly, bowed slightly, and said in gentle Japanese, "Konnichiwa, o genki desu ka?" "Hello, how are you?" The entire room seemed to pause. The old man's eyes widened in surprise, and then, for the first time that day, they sparkled. His lips trembled before curving into a grateful smile. In a soft, emotional voice, he replied in Japanese, asking her name. Emily answered, bowing again slightly, continuing in her best Japanese, explaining that she had studied a bit in school and admired their culture deeply. At that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that transcended language or appearance. Emily took his order with care, making sure every detail was perfect. She poured his water herself, adjusted the napkin, and returned with a cup of green tea instead of coffee, whispering that she remembered Japanese guests preferred it. The old man clasped his hands together, bowing his head slightly before taking a sip. It was a simple act, but in that moment, he felt seen, respected, and valued, not for his wealth, but for his humanity. As Emily served him, a quiet dignity filled the space around them. Other diners began to notice the gentle exchange, the kindness in her gestures, the warmth in his grateful nods. Whispers turned into silence as guilt washed over those who had judged him. Even the manager, realizing who the men might be after overhearing fragments of their conversation, stood frozen near the counter, unsure how to respond. When the meal ended, The old man asked for the check, but the manager rushed over, apologizing profusely and insisting the meal was on the house. The old man shook his head politely. "No," he said softly, his English careful but clear, "respect cannot be free." He took out a small black card from his pocket, something only a few in the world possessed, and handed it to Emily along with a business card embossed in gold. She looked at it, confused, until she read the name. Her eyes widened. Kenji Takahiro. Takahiro Group, she whispered. The manager nearly dropped the tray he was holding. The billionaire smiled faintly. "Kindness," he said slowly, "is the most expensive thing in the world. But you gave it freely. Thank you." He stood, bowed deeply to Emily, and left the restaurant, his steps light, his heart full. The next morning, when Emily came to work, everyone was buzzing with news. The restaurant had received a glowing feature in a national paper. A Japanese billionaire had visited anonymously, praising the kindness of a single waitress who made him feel at home. Along with the article came an envelope addressed to Emily. Inside was a handwritten note and a letter of sponsorship. Mr. Takahiro had offered to fund her college education and help with her family's expenses, saying it was his way of honoring the spirit of kindness that reminded him of someone he once loved. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she read the letter over and over. For her, it wasn't about the money, it was the reminder that being kind, even when no one's watching, could change someone's world in ways unimaginable. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread so we can keep spreading stories that restore faith in humanity. Before we end, I want to ask you one thing: what's the smallest act of kindness someone once did for you that you never forgot? Share it in the comments below. As the sun set outside the restaurant that evening, Emily stood by the window where Mr. Takahiro had sat, her reflection glowing in the golden light. Somewhere across the ocean, an old man smiled while sipping his tea, grateful that in a world that often rushes past, one waitress remembered that kindness still speaks every language. And that, sometimes, the simplest words, konnichiwa, o genki desu ka, can bridge hearts oceans apart. Because in the end, kindness is the truest form of wealth.